Monday mornings at Apex Innovations in New York City buzzed with ambition, coffee in hand. Deadlines looming. But this Monday felt off. A man rolled into the gleaming lobby, his wheelchair gliding silently across the marble. Dressed in a crisp navy suit, James Carter exuded quiet confidence. Yet no one knew his name or his power. He wasn't here to announce himself, he wanted the truth about his company. Unfiltered. Meanwhile, Karen Hayes, the no-nonsense HR chief, strutted through, her eyes sharp with judgment. She spotted him instantly, her sneer forming fast. What she didn't know, her next words would unravel everything. Curious? Tell us your city in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe. The glass doors of Apex Innovations hissed shut behind James Carter as he maneuvered his wheelchair into the lobby. The building towered over Manhattan's tech district, a sleek monument to ambition and cutting-edge design. It was just past 8 a.m., and the Monday rush was in full swing. Employees swiped badges, their sneakers and heels clacking against the polished marble floor. The air smelled of espresso and ambition, a scent James had come to associate with the company he'd built from scratch. Today, though, he wasn't here as the celebrated CEO whose name graced the annual reports. He was a shadow, a stranger in a navy suit, rolling in unnoticed to see what Apex was really made of. James adjusted his tie, his dark eyes scanning the space. The lobby buzzed with life. A receptionist juggled calls behind a curved desk. A group of coders debated something about AI over takeout cups. And a delivery guy darted past with a stack of packages. No one spared James a second glance. Good, that's how he wanted it. He'd spent weeks planning this, telling only his regional manager, Lisa Grant, about his unorthodox arrival. Apex had tripled its revenue in 5 years. But James knew success wasn't just numbers. It was people. And lately, whispers of clicks, favoritism, and worse had reached his ears. He needed to know if the culture he'd envisioned, bold, inclusive, relentless, still held. He guided his wheelchair toward the elevators, the hum of its motor blending into the background noise. His suit was sharp, tailored to fit, but understated. No flashy cufflinks or designer labels to tip anyone off. James had always believed in earning respect through actions, not titles, a belief forged years ago when a car accident left him paralyzed from the waist down. Back then, he'd been dismissed by plenty of suits who couldn't see past the chair. Now, he was the one calling the shots. And he'd built Apex to be different. Or so he hoped. The elevator dinged, and he rolled inside, joining a trio of employees in logoed polos. One, a lanky guy with glasses, glanced at him briefly before returning to his phone. Another, a woman with a buzz cut, tapped her foot impatiently. The third, a stocky man with a beard, muttered something about another Monday crunch. James stayed quiet, letting their chatter wash over him. They didn't know the man in the wheelchair was the reason they had jobs. And he wasn't about to tell them, not yet. The doors slid open on the 10th floor, and James followed the group out. This was the heart of Apex. Open-plan desks stretched across the space, framed by floor-to-ceiling windows that let in the gray February light. Screens glowed with code, and whiteboards scribbled with ideas lined the walls. It looked like the dream he'd had 10 years ago, back when Apex was just a startup in a cramped Brooklyn loft. But dreams could rot if the roots went bad, and James was here to check the soil. He paused near a cluster of desks, pretending to adjust his sleeve. A young employee, maybe mid-20s, with a mop of curly hair, looked up from his laptop. "You need help finding something?" he asked, his tone polite but distracted. James smiled faintly. "Just getting my bearings, thanks." The kid nodded and went back to typing. So far, so good. But James wasn't here for the coders or the coffee machine. He was here for the gatekeepers, the ones who set the tone. And he knew exactly where to find them. Karen Hayes strode through the 10th floor like she owned it, her heels clicking a rhythm that turned heads. At 38, she'd clawed her way to HR chief at Apex Innovations through a mix of grit, charm, and a knack for bending rules just shy of breaking them. Her blonde hair was pulled into a tight bun, and her blazer hugged her frame like armor. She carried a tablet under one arm, her eyes scanning the room for anything, or anyone, out of place. Karen didn't do chaos. She thrived on control, and Apex's pristine reputation was her domain. She'd heard the rumors too. Complaints about toxic vibes filtering up from exit interviews. She'd dismissed them as whining from soft millennials who couldn't hack the pace. Apex was a machine, and she kept it running smooth. If a few egos got bruised along the way, that was their problem. Still, Monday mornings always put her on edge. Too many variables, late arrivals, spilled coffee, excuses. She needed everything in line before the weekly briefing. That's when she saw him. He was near the edge of the open plan area. A black man in a wheelchair. His navy suit crisp against the dull hum of the office. Karen's radar pinged instantly. He didn't fit. No badge, no laptop bag, no flustered intern vibe. Her lips pursed as she sized him up. Probably some consultant who'd wandered off the tour, she thought. Or worse, a diversity hire who didn't know his place. She'd seen his type before. Confident until they realized who was really in charge. Karen adjusted her posture, shoulders back, and made a beeline for him. Heads turned subtly as she passed. Employees knew her approach meant someone was about to get a talking to. She stopped a few feet from James, crossing her arms. Up close, she noted the suit wasn't cheap, maybe Brooks Brothers, but that didn't change her math. No badge, no business. Excuse me, she said, her voice clipped and loud enough to carry. This floor's for employees only. If you're lost, the lobby's downstairs. James tilted his head slightly, meeting her gaze. His expression was calm, almost amused, but his eyes held a weight she didn't catch. I'm right where I need to be, he said, his voice steady, deep, unruffled. Karen blinked, thrown for half a second. Most people stammered or backpedaled when she turned on the ice. This guy didn't. Her lips twitched into a thin smile, the kind she used to mask annoyance. Look, I don't know who let you up here, but this isn't a public space. Let's not make this harder than it needs to be. I can show you out. She took a step closer, expecting compliance. James didn't move. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, his hands resting on the arms of his chair. I appreciate the offer, he said, but I'm staying. The air shifted. A few nearby employees glanced over. Sensing the tension, Karen's smile faded, replaced by a flicker of irritation. Who did this guy think he was? Security must have been asleep at the wheel. She'd have words with them later. For now, she needed him gone. Her authority wasn't up for debate. Before she could fire back, a voice cut through the hum. Karen, wait. It was Lisa Grant, the regional manager, hurrying over from the far side of the floor. Her face was pale, her steps quick. Karen turned, eyebrow arched. What? Lisa's eyes darted to James, then back to Karen. Just hold on a second, she said, her voice tight. Karen frowned. Lisa looked like she'd seen a ghost. Whatever this was, it was about to get interesting. Karen Hayes stood frozen for a split second, her arms still crossed, as Lisa Grant's urgent, wait, echoed across the 10th floor of Apex Innovations. The hum of keyboards and murmured conversations dipped, heads swiveling toward the brewing standoff. Karen's sharp hazel eyes flicked between Lisa and the man in the wheelchair, James Carter, who sat there, unruffled, his navy suit catching the light from the towering windows. Lisa's pale face and quick steps screamed trouble. But Karen wasn't about to back down. Not in her domain. What's the problem, Lisa? Karen snapped, her voice slicing through the thickening air. I'm handling this. He doesn't belong here. End of story. Lisa reached them, slightly out of breath, her hands fluttering like she didn't know where to put them. Karen, you don't understand, she said, her voice low but insistent. Just step back for a sec, okay? Karen's brow furrowed. Step back? She didn't step back for anyone, least of all some random guy who'd rolled onto her turf. She glanced at James again, catching the faintest hint of a smile tugging at his lips. That irked her more than Lisa's panic. If security's slacking, that's on them, she said, louder now, making sure the gawkers heard. This floor's restricted. I don't care who he is, he's leaving. James finally spoke, his tone calm but firm, like a blade wrapped in velvet. I'd rethink that if I were you. Karen's head snapped toward him, her smile gone. Excuse me? She said, stepping closer, her heels clicking ominously. You don't get to tell me what to do. I run this floor. The room seemed to hold its breath. A coder in a hoodie paused mid-keystroke, eyes wide behind his glasses. A woman at the coffee station clutched her mug, watching like it was live theater. Lisa grabbed Karen's arm, her grip tight. "Karen, stop, you're making a mistake." Karen yanked her arm free, her irritation boiling over. "What mistake? This guy's acting like he owns the place. And you're, what, defending him?" She turned back to James, her voice dripping with condescension. "Listen, I don't know what your deal is, but you're not my problem. Security's on speed dial. Let's make this quick." James leaned forward slightly, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "You sure you want to play it that way?" The challenge hung there, heavy and electric. Karen's confidence wavered for a heartbeat. She wasn't used to pushback this steady, but she doubled down. Her ego a steel trap. "Oh, I'm sure," she shot back. "You got 10 seconds to roll out, or I'm done being nice." Lisa's voice cracked. "Karen, he's—" But Karen cut her off, raising a hand. "Save it, Lisa, I've got this." She reached for her phone, fingers hovering over the screen. The office was a pressure cooker now, every eye on the trio. James didn't flinch. If anything, he looked expectant. Lisa's face twisted with dread as Karen tapped her phone, summoning security with the efficiency of someone who'd done it a dozen times before. "Yeah, 10th floor," Karen said into the device. Her tone clipped. "Got an unauthorized visitor. Make it fast." She hung up, smirking at James like she'd just won a chess match. "Time's up." James tilted his head, unfazed. "You're quick," he said, almost approvingly, "but you're digging a hole you won't climb out of." Karen laughed, a short, harsh sound. "Cute. Keep talking. You'll be rolling out of here in about 30 seconds. Lisa couldn't take it anymore. She stepped between them, her voice rising in a near shout. "Karen, stop. That's James Carter, he's the CEO." The words hit like a freight train. Karen's smirk froze, then melted into something unreadable. Her phone slipped slightly in her hand, but she caught it, her knuckles whitening. The office erupted into a ripple of gasps and whispers. "No way," someone muttered. "That's him?" said another. The coder in the hoodie dropped his pen, staring slack-jawed. Karen blinked, her brain scrambling to catch up. "What did you say?" she asked, her voice quieter now, edged with disbelief. Lisa swallowed hard, her eyes darting to James, then back to Karen. "He's James Carter, our CEO. He started Apex. I told you he was coming today, just not like this." Karen's gaze swung to James, who sat there, composed, watching her unravel. Her mouth opened, then closed, the air sucked out of her lungs. "No," she said, shaking her head. That's not possible. He's exactly who I say I am." James finished for her, his voice cutting through her denial like a scalpel. "And you just showed me everything I needed to see." The whispers grew louder, a wave of shock rolling through the floor. Karen's arms dropped to her sides, her tablet clattering onto a nearby desk. She'd spent years building her reputation, ruthless, untouchable, and now it teetered on the edge of a cliff. She looked at Lisa, then back at James, searching for a lifeline. I wasn't," she stammered, her usual steel dissolving into panic. James leaned back in his chair, his presence filling the room. "You didn't what?" he asked, his tone deceptively mild. "Didn't mean to judge me before I opened my mouth? Didn't think I belonged because of this?" He tapped the arm of his wheelchair, the gesture sharp and deliberate. Karen flinched, the truth stung, and she had no defense. Employees were standing now, some craning their necks, others exchanging wide-eyed looks. The air crackled with anticipation. Everyone knew this was more than a mix-up. It was a reckoning. Security arrived, 2 guards in Navy uniforms stepping off the elevator. They paused, sensing the tension, and looked to Karen for direction. She waved them off weakly, her hand trembling. "Forget it," she muttered. "False alarm." James watched the guards retreat, then turned his attention back to Karen. "You're good at your job," he said, his voice low but carrying. "But you're terrible at seeing people. That ends today." The silence that followed James's words was suffocating. Karen stood there, exposed, her authority stripped bare in front of the entire 10th floor. The employees didn't cheer or clap, not yet. They were too stunned, too caught up in the rawness of the moment. Lisa shifted uncomfortably, her relief at stopping Karen warring with the dread of what came next. Karen's mind raced, grasping for a way out. "Mr. Carter," she started, her voice shaky but forcing a professional edge. "I apologize. I didn't realize, I'd never." "Save it," James said, raising a hand. "Apologies don't erase what you did. They don't change how you think." Her face flushed, a mix of shame and defiance. "I was just doing my job," she said, clinging to the last shred of her defense. "This floor's restricted. I didn't know." "You didn't ask," James cut in. "You assumed. That's the problem. You saw a black man in a wheelchair and decided I didn't belong. No questions, no hesitation. That's not a mistake, it's a choice." The words landed like blows, and Karen recoiled. The room felt smaller, the eyes on her sharper. She'd always prided herself on quick decisions, but now they'd turned on her. She glanced at Lisa, hoping for backup, but Lisa looked away, her lips pressed tight. James turned his wheelchair slightly, addressing the growing crowd. "This isn't about one person," he said, his voice rising with conviction. "It's about Apex. We're here to push boundaries, not build walls. If you can't see past your own biases, you don't belong here, period." A murmur of agreement rippled through the employees. The coder nodded slowly. The woman with the buzz cut from the elevator clenched her fist in quiet support. Karen's world tilted. She'd spent years enforcing rules, but now she was the one breaking something bigger. James looked back at her, his gaze steady. "You're done calling shots until I say otherwise. We'll talk later, alone." Karen nodded mutely, her throat dry. The climax of her career wasn't a promotion or a corner office. It was this, a public fall, witnessed by the people she'd ruled with an iron grip. The 10th floor of Apex Innovations buzzed with a new energy as the confrontation settled into stunned silence. James Carter's wheelchair rolled smoothly toward the center of the open-plan space, his navy suit still impeccable despite the storm he'd just unleashed. Employees lingered at their desks, some standing, others whispering, their eyes darting between James and Karen Hayes, who stood like a statue near the edge of the room. Her blazer felt heavy now, her tablet abandoned on a desk, her once commanding presence reduced to a shadow. Karen's mind churned. She'd built her career on control, every memo, every reprimand, every cold stare calculated to keep Apex's machine humming. But in seconds, it had all crumbled. James's words, "You're done calling shots," echoed in her ears. Sharp and final. She wanted to argue, to claw back her authority, but the weight of every watching eye pinned her in place. For the first time, she felt the sting of being the outsider she'd so often dismissed. James stopped, turning his chair to face the room. The gray February light streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor. He took a slow breath, letting the tension simmer, then spoke. "What happened here isn't just about one mistake," he said, his voice steady but resonant. "It's about what we stand for. Apex isn't a logo or a profit margin, it's us. Every one of you. And if we let prejudice call the shots, we're not innovating, we're failing." The employees nodded, some exchanging glances, others leaning in. The coder in the hoodie, Ethan, his name tag read, crossed his arms, a flicker of pride in his eyes. The woman with the buzz cut, Mia, stood taller, her earlier impatience replaced with resolve. James's presence wasn't just commanding, it was magnetic. He'd walked, or rolled, into their world and flipped it upside down. Not with anger, but with purpose. Karen shifted, her heels scuffing the floor. She caught Lisa Grant's eye across the room. Lisa, still pale from the showdown, gave a small, tight nod, not sympathy, but acknowledgement. Karen swallowed hard. She'd never liked Lisa, too soft, too hesitant, but now she envied her quiet strength. Lisa had known who James was and tried to stop the train wreck. Karen hadn't listened. That was on her. James continued, his gaze sweeping the room. "I built this company to push limits, tech, ideas, people. That means no one gets left out. Not because of a chair, or skin color, or anything else. If you're here, you belong. And if you can't handle that, there's the door." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Change starts now. Not tomorrow. Not next quarter, now. The room erupted into applause. Tentative at first, then swelling into a wave. Ethan clapped hard, his glasses slipping down his nose. Mia joined in, her fist pumping once. Even the stocky guy from the elevator, who'd grumbled about Monday crunches, cracked a grin and added his hands to the sound. It wasn't just applause for James, it was relief. A release of tension that had festered too long under Karen's reign. Karen didn't clap. She couldn't. Her hands hung limp at her sides. Her face burning. She'd spent years tearing down anyone who didn't fit her mold, convincing herself it was for the company's good. Now, the company was cheering her downfall. She looked at James, his calm authority unshaken, and felt something crack inside, regret. Maybe. Or the first hint of clarity. It was too late to undo the damage. But the lesson was brutal. Power built on disdain was a house of cards. James gave a small nod, signaling the end of his speech. Back to work, he said, a faint smile breaking through. We've got a future to build. The crowd dispersed slowly, buzzing with renewed energy, leaving Karen alone in her corner, the applause still ringing in her ears. Later that evening, the lights of Apex Innovations dimmed as the last employees trickled out. James sat in his office, a glass-walled perch overlooking the Manhattan skyline, reviewing reports on his tablet. The day had been a gut punch, but it was just the start. Creating a culture of respect wasn't a one-off speech, it was a grind. Day after day, he'd seen the spark in his team. Though, their applause wasn't just noise. It was a promise, and he'd hold them to it. Downstairs, Lisa Grant packed her bag, her movements slow but deliberate. She'd always admired James, ever since he'd hired her out of a failing startup 5 years ago. Today, she'd seen him in action, not just the visionary CEO, but the man who'd turned his own struggles into strength. She doubted herself when Karen steamrolled her warnings, but James's trust had steadied her. Now, she felt a quiet fire, to lead with compassion, not just follow orders. She zipped her bag and glanced at the empty 10th floor. Tomorrow would be different. Karen lingered too, alone at her desk. The office was silent now, the hum of the day replaced by the distant rumble of the city. She stared at her tablet, its screen dark, replaying the moment James had called her out. You're terrible at seeing people. She hated that he was right. She judged him, his chair, his calm, his very existence, without a second thought. Years of snapping at interns, icing out troublemakers, flashed through her mind. She'd thought it made her strong. It hadn't. It had made her brittle. She wouldn't quit, not yet. James had said they'd talk later. And she'd face it, whatever came. But something had shifted. For the first time, she saw the cost of her arrogance, not just to her, but to everyone she'd pushed down. It wasn't redemption, not yet, but it was a start. Back in his office, James set the tablet aside and wheeled to the window. The city glittered below, a chaos of lights and lives. He thought of his own journey, countless doors shut in his face, countless assumptions he'd had to shatter. Apex was his answer to that. A place where talent trumped bias. Today proved it could still be that, but only if he kept pushing. This wasn't just Apex's story, it's ours. Prejudice doesn't die easy, but it crumbles when we stand up. When we see people for who they are, not what we assume. Have you ever faced a moment like this, where justice broke through? Share it below, your city, your story. And if this hit you, like it, subscribe, help us hit 10,000 strong. Together, we're more than a channel, we're a movement. This isn't just Apex's story, it's ours. Prejudice doesn't die easy, but it crumbles when we stand up. When we see people for who they are, not what we assume. Have you ever faced a moment like this, where justice broke through? Drop your city and your story in the comments below. Let's inspire each other. If this hit home, smash that like button, subscribe, and help us reach 10,000 subscribers. Together, we're not just a channel, we're a movement for change. Don't miss out. Share this with someone who needs to hear it.